The U.S. Senate, it did approve today the proposal that raises the U.S. debt ceiling. It was passed by the House of Representatives yesterday. So what does this deal accomplish? What happens next, particularly in light of the fact that it seems that in the United States, they didn't cut a heck of a lot in the first place, and they certainly didn't raise any revenue along the way in an effort to turn this massive boat around at any length of time. You look at the equity markets. They didn't seem particularly happy. Maybe some of the debt rating agencies aren't as well. For perspective, Nariman, chief economist at IHS Global Insight, joins us now. Nariman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, the big question is, will the ratings agencies still downgrade the AAA to AA? What do you think?
Well, one of them might. That's Standard & Poor's. The others probably won't. And even if S&P lowers the rating, it's probably going to be a non-event. I mean, they've been talking about it now for a number of weeks. The markets have the same information that S&P does. So my guess is it's a non-event. They may very well downgrade, but big deal.
Okay, but how could it be a non-event considering there are so many whose investment charter denies them the ability to invest in AA bonds in the first place?
Well, there are no good alternatives. No, they're not, let's put it this way, there are not a lot of alternatives out there. So I suspect those charters could be changed by the various boards. Again, I doubt very much this is a big deal with ripple effects across the financial system. But you also have to ask the question, if one ratings agency or rating agency downgrades, the others don't, what does that mean? I'm not sure.
We've been talking a lot about kicking the can down the road. That road's not particularly long when it comes to the U.S. Elections in 2012. What do you think the playout is going to be there?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's the biggest uncertainty here because, as you well know, part of the plan is to have this commission make a report and the Congress vote on it. If they don't vote on it, then you've got these triggers that go through the automatic cuts at the end of, well, at the beginning of 2013, after the 2012 election. So a scare scenario is the trigger, as it were, in January 2013. The Bush tax cuts expire in January 2013. The debt ceiling limit comes back up for vote, and we could have a mess on our hands again.
It sounds like this was largely a political, as the words come out of my mouth, it sounds so naive. Nariman, it is largely a political game that we've seen play out here than a fiscal one.
Exactly. Look, the U.S. isn't insolvent. It's good for its debts. It's not Greece. Far from it. This is a political crisis. That's what it was. An unnecessary one and a self-inflicted one has to say. So that's what we saw play out in the last couple of weeks.
Well, when you say this is not Greece, you look at the 10-year note out of Greece, the yield versus what we're seeing on the 10-year note in the United States, and considering how much bigger the problems could be in the U.S. versus any Eurozone member for that matter, it's surprising that we haven't seen more of a reaction from the bondies. Where are the bond vigilantes?
Well, there are two things going on. First of all, the bond vigilantes are not worried about the U.S. paying on its debt. I mean, that's quite clear. And coming back to the S&P downgrade thing, they're not worried about it. They've heard about it. They don't care. I mean, really. But very importantly, what the markets are now reacting to is the very weak economic growth. So the bond market's much more worried about a recession than they are worried about a default.
All right. Now, in the event that we do see S&P downgrade to AA from AAA, the costs to borrow go up for the U.S. government. What does that mean for this sputtering recession recovery you're dealing with there?
Well, let's put it this way. Maybe they'll go up for the U.S. government in terms of the borrowing costs. I mean, remember, S&P put the U.S. on warning. Nothing happened. S&P has downgraded Japan. Nothing's happened to bond yields. It's not at all clear that other than a very temporary little blip that we'll see much of an increase in borrowing costs. Now, if it were to happen, again, unlikely, but if it were to happen, then clearly it would do damage to the recovery. But I don't think that's very likely.
What about the cuts that have been put forth in this document Mr. Obama just signed? Will that harm economic growth?
Well, the good news is they're backloaded. So for the first couple of years, the cuts are fairly small, maybe reducing GDP growth by a tenth or two in terms of percentage points of growth. But it's in the out years that the big cuts occur, and that's where they could be a big drag on growth, clearly.
So when it comes down to it, when your phone rings in your office and there's that concern on the other end of the line, what's your base statement here?
Well, the base statement is uncertainty. That is that, yes, we avoided Armageddon, if you will, but it's still unclear how the U.S. is going to get out of this mess in terms of raising revenues, fixing the entitlement programs. None of these have been dealt with, and they probably won't be dealt with until after the 2012 election. So we still have huge amounts of uncertainty about what the U.S. is going to do to fix its fiscal problem.
For those of us who don't actively follow U.S. politics, tell us about the 2012 elections. What's at stake there, and whether or not the Obama administration really has anything to do with it?
Well, obviously a lot is at stake here. And I think the bad news for the Obama people is if the vote was just on the economy, they would lose. Because with an unemployment rate that's north of 9%, this is very bad news for them. So if the Republicans put up a reasonable candidate, that reasonable candidate would have a good shot at the presidency in 2012 election.
Palin?
No.
Romney?
Yes.
Really? Why?
Well, you know, Romney's a centrist. And I think the U.S. elections are won right down the middle in the end. You know, the way Obama won in 2008 was by appealing to independent voters. Same thing's going to happen in whoever comes in 2012. If there's an extreme candidate from the Republican Party, they're not going to be able to win the center.
Well, Nariman, we appreciate your insight. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Nariman Behravesh, Chief Economist at IHS Global Insight.